I never thought the home I built with scraped savings and late-night paint jobs would turn me into the villain of my own bloodline. 5 years after my parents cut me off for refusing to bankroll my sister, they returned, not with apologies, but with demands. Sell my house to erase her $260,000 crisis. When I said no, they didn't argue. They broke in. They tore apart the walls I rebuilt, forgetting this house held secrets sharper than guilt. That night, police cars carried my family away. Before I explain why, tell me, how far would you let family go? From the outside, my childhood looked like a postcard version of the American dream. We lived in a quiet suburb where lawns were trimmed, kids rode bikes until dinner, and parents waved politely at each other over mailboxes. Neighbours saw a normal family of 4. My father with his steady job, my mother with her cheerful smile, and 2 daughters who seemed to have everything. What no one saw was the hierarchy written into every room of that house. My younger sister Vivian sparkled under the spotlight our parents built for her, while I, Mara, learned to survive in the shadows. Vivian was the golden child. She had the kind of natural charm that drew teachers, coaches, and relatives to her like moths to a flame. If there was a school play, she was the star. If there was a recital, she was front and centre. Our living room walls were crowded with her ribbons, trophies, and framed photographs. Evidence of her brilliance, carefully curated by our mother. Meanwhile, my own achievements were filed away in a shoebox under my bed. Good grades? Expected. Perfect attendance? Barely worth mentioning. Responsibility was invisible currency, and I had plenty of it, but it never bought me attention. Vivian has such talent, my father would beam at holiday dinners, his voice full of pride. She's destined for something extraordinary. Then he would glance at me and add, "And Mara, well, she's independent. She'll figure things out." Independent. That was the word they used instead of overlooked. It was the polite label for being left to fend for myself. By the time I was 16, I had accepted my role. While Vivian prepared for her next performance, I was folding shirts at a retail store after school, clocking in hours at the diner on weekends, and babysitting for neighbours in between. Every dollar I earned went into a coffee tin hidden under my bed. I knew college would be on my shoulders. My parents had made it clear that their savings were already spoken for. Vivian's education requires investment, my father told me, as if talent came with a price tag. You're smart enough to manage on your own. So I managed. I mapped out scholarships, applied for grants, and built a safety net from my wages. There were nights I came home long after everyone was asleep, smelling like fryer grease, only to hear laughter drifting from the living room where my parents toasted Vivian's latest triumph. I would pass by the photo frames, my own reflection caught in the glass beside her smiling face, and remind myself to keep going. The first time I thought they finally saw me was the night of Vivian's senior award ceremony. To my surprise, my parents insisted I attend. "It's a big night for the family," my mother said, pressing a dress into my hands. For once I dared to believe I might be included not as a background figure, but as someone they were proud of too. I sat in the auditorium, watching the lights sweep across the stage, my heart pounding with a fragile hope. Vivian's name was announced again and again. Best performance, outstanding achievement, rising star. Each time she walked across the stage, our parents clapped furiously, their faces glowing. Then, near the end of the programme, there was a brief mention of me, an honour roll certificate. The applause was polite, perfunctory, already drowned beneath the roar for Vivian's next award. The family photo afterward sealed the truth. My parents pulled Vivian between them, arms draped around her shoulders, while I stood to the side, holding my certificate like a prop. Later, scrolling through the pictures, I realised my face was barely visible, cropped, out of focus, forgotten. The invitation hadn't been about celebrating me. It had been about making sure Vivian looked even brighter by comparison. That night, as they talked about her future art school plans over dessert, I quietly cleared the table, the echo of their laughter following me down the hall. My place in the family had never been clearer. The silent backdrop to Vivian's spotlight, the scaffolding that no one notices, but without which the stage would collapse. And so I carried my coffee tin back to my room, counted the bills under dim lamplight, and promised myself that one day I would build a life that didn't require anyone else's applause. 5 years ago, the phone rang just past midnight. I remember the sharp vibration against my nightstand, the unfamiliar number lighting up the screen, and the sound of Vivian's voice cracking with urgency. "Mara, it's me. I need your help. The gallery is falling apart. If I don't get 30,000 by the end of the month, everything I've built is gone." 30,000. For me, that was nearly my entire savings. Years of skipped vacations, bargain groceries, and second-hand furniture stacked into one fragile sum. I asked her for a plan, a timeline, anything to prove this wasn't another bottomless pit. She bristled, offended. "Family doesn't demand terms. Family helps family." An hour later, my mother called. Her tone wasn't pleading. It was accusatory. "How could you hesitate? Your sister's dream is at stake." I explained that I couldn't simply hand over everything without knowing it would make a difference. My father's call came last, colder than both. "We raised you to put family above money. If you can't support your sister now, maybe you're not truly part of this family." That was the ultimatum. My sister or my savings, family or money. I chose the security I had bled for, and in that choice they severed me. Calls went unanswered. Cards were returned unopened. On holidays, I scrolled through pictures of gatherings where my face was absent, captions dripping with sanctimony, family forever. The silence was one kind of punishment. The whispers were another. Relatives began reaching out, some cautiously curious, others openly hostile. "Why would you abandon your parents after all they did for you?" an aunt demanded in an email. "Your poor sister, working so hard while you hoard your money." They had been fed a story in which I was the selfish one, the cold-hearted daughter who had turned her back on her blood. Vivian was painted as the wronged dreamer, and my parents were the noble martyrs who had sacrificed everything for her only to be betrayed by me. I became the villain in my own family's narrative. No matter how hard I tried to explain, the script had already been written and rehearsed. I stopped answering those calls too, realizing each conversation was just another courtroom where I was already condemned. The first holiday alone was brutal. I cooked a turkey too big for one, sat at a table meant for 4, and cried into a plate that went cold before I touched it. I spent my birthday in silence, my phone stubbornly still. I started therapy because the grief felt like a weight pressing into my chest, and Dr. Serena Knox gave me the words I had never been allowed: scapegoat, golden child, conditional love. She told me boundaries weren't cruelty, they were survival, so I poured myself into survival. I worked late, climbed each rung of the career ladder, and built my savings back brick by brick. The ache of abandonment dulled but never disappeared. Every raise, every small victory was a reminder that I was doing it alone, without the approval or pride of the people who should have given it freely. 3 years into that exile, I found the house. A weathered 1925 craftsman on a quiet street, its porch wide enough for a swing, its oak banisters polished by decades of hands. The first time I stepped inside, the leaded glass scattered light across the floor like broken rainbows, and something inside me clicked. This wasn't just shelter, it was proof. Proof that my sacrifices meant something. Proof that I could build stability without anyone's permission. Signing those papers was the proudest moment of my life. No one handed me the keys. I earned them. Every brushstroke of paint I rolled onto those walls, every cabinet I refinished with my own blistered hands, stitched me back together. In that house, I created a sanctuary, a life free of ultimatums. I had been cast as the villain, but within those walls I wrote myself as the survivor. And as the years passed, the echoes of abandonment began to fade beneath the creak of old wood floors, and the laughter of new friends who felt more like family than my blood ever had. The call came on a Tuesday evening, ordinary enough that I almost let it roll to voicemail. 5 years of silence had taught me to ignore unknown numbers, but something in me pressed accept. The voice on the other end was soft, almost casual. "Mara, it's Mom." For a second my body froze. 5 years of exile collapsed into that single word. She didn't apologize or acknowledge the years of absence. Instead, she invited me to dinner. "It's time we came together again. Your father and I would love to see you. Vivian will be there too." My first instinct was to hang up, but loneliness is a treacherous negotiator. Part of me still craved what had never been given freely: recognition, inclusion. The next morning I booked an emergency session with Dr. Serena Knox. "What do you hope for from this dinner?" she asked after listening. "Best case? They admit what they did and we start over. Worst case, they want something." Dr. Knox tilted her head. "And which seems more likely?" I sighed. "The latter. Then go in with boundaries. You don't have to prove anything. You don't owe them explanations." Armed with those words, I drove to my childhood home Friday evening. The closer I got, the more the landscape betrayed decay. Lawns uncut. Paint peeling on houses that had once gleamed with suburban pride. When I pulled into the driveway, my chest tightened. The garden beds my mother used to fuss over were overrun with weeds. A shutter dangled loose, clattering faintly in the wind. My father opened the door. His hair had turned fully grey, his frame thinner. "Mara," he said, as if it had been 5 days, not 5 years. No hug, just a flat greeting. Inside, the air smelled faintly of mildew instead of the lemon polish I remembered. Furniture was mismatched, cheaper replacements filling gaps where valuable pieces had once stood. The walls, once crowded with art, now bore discount family photos in plastic frames. A family portrait remained above the mantel, but my absence in every newer picture screamed louder than the silence that had cut me out. My mother appeared from the kitchen, bright but strained. She hugged me quickly, then held me at arm's length. "Still so serious?" she said, forcing a smile. "You need to smile more, sweetie." It was as if no time had passed, as if my erasure had been a minor misunderstanding. We sat at the dining table, and I noticed the food was simpler than in the past. Meatloaf instead of roasts. Canned vegetables instead of fresh. My mother poured wine into mismatched glasses and asked about my work, my living situation. The questions carried an edge. Not curiosity, but accounting. "So, you're still with that financial firm? Did you get promoted? Are you renting?" My father leaned in on that last word. I own my home, I admitted cautiously. Their eyes flickered to each other. Something unspoken passed between them. Before I could probe, the front door burst open. Vivian swept in like a gust of expensive perfume. Her hair was professionally styled, her dress unmistakably designer, diamond studs catching the light. "Sorry I'm late," she announced, tossing a luxury bag onto the couch. Traffic was insane. And oh my God, Mara! She enveloped me in a hug, sticky sweet, as though the years of silence had been nothing. The contrast hit me like a punch. My parents' house sagged under neglect, but Vivian glittered as though hardship had never touched her. She looked like prosperity incarnate, while the home that had funded her dreams crumbled around her. It was a grotesque tableau, the favoured daughter shining while the foundation that upheld her disintegrated. Throughout dinner, the imbalance hung heavy. Vivian dominated conversation with stories of art shows, celebrity parties, networking events that sounded more like indulgences than business. My parents laughed dutifully, as though these tales excused the fading wallpaper, the pawned furniture, the hollow echo of sacrifice. I sat there, tasting bitterness more than food, realizing with sinking clarity that this wasn't reconciliation, it was reconnaissance. They hadn't called me back to mend what was broken. They had called me because, once again, they needed something. And this time, I knew they weren't going to ask politely. Dinner reached a lull, the kind that signals something heavier is about to be dropped. Vivian swirled her wine, sighing dramatically. This economy is brutal for creatives. My boutique is drowning. The landlord won't cover renovations, vendors want payment, and my business partner bailed. It's been hard. I set down my fork. How hard? Her eyes flicked to our parents. My father cleared his throat, his voice heavy with rehearsed gravity. 260,000. The number hit me like a slap. "Excuse me?" Vivian straightened, defensive. "It's not just the boutique. There were personal loans, credit cards I used for inventory, renovations on my apartment." "You renovated a rental?" My disbelief slipped out sharper than intended. "It's an investment in my brand," she snapped, chin lifted. "Clients expect a certain aesthetic. I can't host them in some dump." My mother reached across the table, patting Vivian's hand as though she were a misunderstood genius. "Your sister has always had vision. Risks come with ambition." I leaned back, ice creeping into my veins. "So you invited me here to tell me about Vivian's debt?" My father didn't flinch. "We've done all we can. Our savings are gone. We mortgaged the house. We even sold valuables. There's nothing left." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said carefully, "but I don't see what this has to do with me." My mother's eyes glistened with practiced tears. "Mara, we know you bought a house. Homes in your neighbourhood are selling for over 400,000. After paying off your mortgage, you'd have plenty left for a modest condo. You could help Vivian and still have a roof over your head." The audacity left me speechless. Vivian jumped in, seizing momentum. "I did some research. You'd clear enough to wipe my debts and start over comfortably. It's the perfect solution." "You've researched my equity," I said slowly, my stomach dropping. "Before even speaking to me." "We're family," my father said firmly. "We help each other. That's how this works." I stared at him, remembering the phone calls 5 years ago, the same script, the same accusation, the same ultimatum. "If you can't support this family, maybe you're not part of it." My voice trembled, but not with fear, with fury. "So here we are again. Nothing has changed. 5 years ago, you cut me out for protecting my savings. And now you're back, demanding more." Vivian slammed her hand on the table, rattling the glasses. God, you've always been jealous of me, acting so righteous because you earned everything. You just want to see me fail." "Jealous?" I laughed bitterly. "I've worked for every inch of ground I stand on while you've been carried. And even now, after years of silence, you still haven't asked how I am. You just want what I have." My father's voice rose, stern and unyielding. "We're offering you a chance to bring this family back together. Don't throw it away. By selling my home, by sacrificing everything again so Vivian can escape consequences?" I pushed back from the table. "No, my answer is no." My mother's tears spilled over. "How can you be so cruel? We raised you better." "You raised me to believe my worth depended on what I could give up for Vivian," I said quietly. "I'm done playing that part." I stood, gathering my purse. My father's words chased me down the hallway. "If you walk out that door, don't expect another invitation." I paused, hand on the knob. "You gave me that exact ultimatum 5 years ago. Sister or money. And just like then, I'm choosing myself." The night air was cold as I stepped outside, but it felt cleaner than the air I'd been breathing at that table. My phone buzzed before I reached the car. A text from my mother. "Selfish. Family helps family. By the time I drove home, dozens more had arrived. Pleas, guilt trips, accusations, then threats. We know love for you all." My voicemail filled with voices alternating between sobs and fury. On social media, Vivian posted cryptic messages about toxic sisters who hoard wealth. Relatives began chiming in, their judgments sharp and shallow. The storm closed in around me. For a moment, the weight of it made me wonder if I had done the wrong thing. But as I locked my front door, the wood solid beneath my hand, I knew this much was true. I had walked away once, and I could do it again. 3 days after the dinner that ended with slammed doors and accusations, my doorbell rang. I checked the camera feed and nearly dropped my phone. My parents stood on my porch, side by side, their faces arranged into something between humility and resolve. Against my better judgment, I opened the door, blocking the threshold with my body. "May we come in?" my mother asked softly. Her voice carried that practiced gentleness she used whenever she wanted something. Everything in me screamed no. But loneliness, guilt, and an ingrained reflex to obey cracked me open. I stepped aside. They moved slowly through the entryway, eyes darting like inspectors. My father commented on the paint colours. My mother praised the light fixtures. Then she said the words that tightened the knot in my stomach. "Would you show us around? We'd love to see the home you've built." It was presented as innocent curiosity, but I knew better. Still, I led them through each room. My father lingered near my office, running a hand along the desk. Without asking, he opened the closet door, spotting the stacked file boxes. "You always were organised," he said, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp. In the kitchen, my mother trailed her fingers along the countertop before letting her gaze flicker, just for a second, toward the key rack by the back door. My spare set hung there, small and ordinary, but her attention was anything but casual. She smiled when she caught me watching, as if to mask the slip, but I had already seen too much. I felt my chest tighten. This wasn't reconciliation, it was reconnaissance. As we finished the so-called tour, they sat with me in the living room. My father folded his hands, leaning forward with the solemnity of a negotiator. We may have been harsh the other night, but perhaps there's a compromise. I braced myself. You don't have to sell the house, my mother said brightly. You could take out a home equity line of credit, a HELOC. That way you keep your home and help Vivian at the same time. I blinked. You're suggesting I borrow money against my house for her debt? Think of it as an investment in your sister, my father said firmly. We'd help with the payments. I laughed, sharp, humourless. Like you helped with my college? Like you supported me while I worked 3 jobs through high school? Like you answered the phone on holidays? Their smiles faltered. My mother's eyes hardened first. You're twisting things. We sacrifice plenty for you. No, I said quietly, the anger sharpening every word. You met the legal minimum of parenthood and poured the rest into Vivian. Now you want me to shoulder the fallout. Silence pressed in. My father shifted, trying another angle. This could bring us closer. Family united in hardship. I stood, signalling the conversation was over. Or it could trap me in the same cycle I escaped. No deal. Their expressions cracked, their warmth peeling away to reveal the entitlement beneath. My father muttered something about ungratefulness. My mother gathered her purse with stiff precision. At the door, she paused, her tones syrupy once more. Just think about it, Mara. You'll see it's the right thing. I closed the door behind them, the lock sliding into place with a click that felt more final than any word I could have spoken. My sanctuary suddenly felt smaller, every corner touched by their presence. I replayed the glances, the probing, the subtle inventory of my life, the key rack by the door, the file boxes in my office. They hadn't come to reconcile, they had come to scout. And the realization made the walls of my beloved house feel less like shelter and more like a target. After that uneasy visit, silence didn't return. It was replaced by noise, an orchestrated kind of noise that spread like smoke under every door of my life. The first wave came from relatives. My inbox filled with messages from cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, each parroting the same phrases. Family helps family. Don't be selfish. Your parents sacrificed everything, and you can't even lift a finger. The language was so uniform it felt scripted. Then came the posts. Vivian began flooding social media with artfully vague updates. Some people only care about money, even if it means watching their family suffer. Each post was paired with carefully chosen photos of her, looking distraught or noble, sometimes even digging up old childhood pictures of the two of us. Her smiling, me stiff in the background. The captions painted me as cold, heartless, greedy. Friends of hers, acquaintances of mine, even extended relatives started chiming in with outrage. The narrative was being written in real time, and I was the villain again. But what chilled me most wasn't what I could see, it was what came through my phone. At first, texts came from my mother's number, pleas, guilt trips, accusations. When I blocked her, new numbers appeared. Some messages were longer, carefully worded, echoing Vivian's online tone. Others were shorter, crueler. We know where you live. You'll regret this. No one will side with you when the truth comes out. One night, after a particularly vicious round, I scrolled back through the messages. That's when I noticed something. The formatting was different. Certain words capitalized in exactly the same way across multiple numbers, as if copied and pasted. Some sentences repeated almost verbatim from emails my aunt had sent days earlier. Twist 6 hit me like ice water. This wasn't random. It was a campaign. Vivian and my parents weren't just lashing out emotionally, they were coordinating. They had crafted a narrative, handed out talking points, and armed anyone willing to pile on. The walls of my house, once comforting, now felt porous. Every buzz of my phone jolted me like an alarm. I blocked numbers until my call log looked like a blacklist, but the messages kept coming. I muted notifications only to find emails waiting instead. They were determined to breach every boundary I set. I started checking my security cameras more obsessively, scanning the feeds late at night. The front porch, the driveway, the back gate. Each creak of the old house made me tense, wondering if someone was outside. I found myself double-checking locks before bed, then again after I'd already turned out the light. One evening I caught myself sitting on the living room floor with the lights off, staring at the glow of the camera monitor like a soldier on watch. My sanctuary, the home I had poured sweat and pride into, felt less like a refuge and more like a battleground. I tried to ground myself. "It's just words," I whispered, but words had power. Words had already severed me from my family once before, and now they were being used as weapons to storm the walls of my peace. The next therapy session, I confessed to Dr. Knox how the house itself felt unsafe. "It's not just the texts," I told her. "It's the way they look at my life as if it's theirs to claim. I can feel them circling." Her voice was calm, firm. "That's because they are circling. You're perceiving real threats, not imagining them. But remember, you are not powerless in this. You have proof, you have allies, and you have the right to protect what you've built." Her words steadied me, but only briefly, because late that night, as I checked the cameras once more, I saw something that made my breath catch. A shadow moved near the edge of the yard, too quick to capture clearly. Maybe an animal, maybe not. The timestamp glowed on the footage, imprinting the moment into my memory. My house, once the symbol of freedom, now stood at the centre of a siege I hadn't chosen. And the worst part was knowing the people leading it weren't strangers, but the very ones who should have been my shelter. It had been an ordinary workday, the kind I clung to for normalcy. I parked in my driveway just after sunset, the porch light I'd set on a timer casting its familiar glow. But as I stepped out of the car, something felt off. The front door, the one I always double-checked before leaving, was ajar. A thin line of darkness split the frame. My stomach dropped. For a moment, I told myself maybe I'd been careless, maybe I hadn't latched it all the way, but then I heard it, the muffled sound of drawers slamming, the sharp crack of something breaking. Someone was inside. My pulse hammered in my ears as I crept closer. From the threshold, I could see chaos, books scattered across the floor, cushions ripped open, feathers drifting like snow. The orderly home I had built with my own hands was a storm zone. And scrawled across the living room wall, in thick red lipstick, was a single word: selfish. The sight rooted me to the spot. That word had haunted every message, every phone call, every accusation. Now it was carved into the skin of my sanctuary, a brand they wanted me to carry forever. I forced my legs to move, pulling out my phone. My thumb hovered over 911, but a crash deeper in the house jolted me forward. "Check the office again," I heard my mother's voice say. I froze. My parents. I stepped into the room, heart pounding, and saw them. My father rifling through desk drawers, my mother kicking aside a pile of papers, Vivian emerging from the hallway with a triumphant smile. In her hands was a stack of documents, my mortgage file. "Found it," she said, her eyes alight. For a moment I couldn't speak. My sanctuary, my fortress, invaded by the very people who should have protected me. "What are you doing?" I shouted, my voice breaking with rage. Vivian barely flinched. "You don't understand. This is for your own good, for the family." My father turned, his expression unsettlingly calm. Sometimes you need to be taught a lesson about priorities. I gripped my phone so hard it hurt. "You broke into my house. You destroyed my things, and you think this is for my good?" "It's just stuff," Vivian scoffed, waving the papers like a trophy. "What matters is family. You value this house more than us, and that's sick." "Things can be replaced," my mother added coldly. "Family cannot." My laugh came out jagged. "Family? You cut me out 5 years ago because I refused to bankroll your daughter. Now you break in, vandalize my walls, and call that family." Vivian's mask of triumph slipped for just a moment, her jaw tightening. "You'll thank us when this is over." That was when my training from therapy kicked in. Boundaries are survival. I lifted the phone and dialed. The operator's calm voice steadied me. 911, what is your emergency?" "My family broke into my home," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "They've destroyed my property. They're trying to steal my documents." As I gave my address, my father stepped closer, fury flashing across his face. "You'd call the police on your own parents?" "Yes," I said, louder than I thought possible, "because this isn't family, this is abuse." The dispatcher told me to stay on the line. Help was on the way. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, growing louder. My parents glanced at each other, realization dawning, but Vivian clutched the papers tighter, as if her grip could rewrite reality. I stood my ground. The word selfish burning on the wall behind me like an accusation and a defiance all at once. The sirens grew louder until blue lights pulsed through the windows, washing the chaos in strobing flashes. My parents stiffened, Vivian's eyes darting toward the back door like a trapped animal. A hard knock rattled the frame. "Police! Open up!" I moved first, pushing past my father's outstretched hand. When I opened the door, 2 officers stepped inside, scanning the room in one sweeping glance. Their eyes took in the slashed cushions, the scattered papers, the word selfish smeared across the wall. "What happened here, Mom?" the first officer asked. I pointed at the figures frozen in my living room. "They broke in. They destroyed my property. They were searching for my mortgage documents." "That's ridiculous." My mother snapped, her voice shrill. "We're her family. We had every right to be here." The second officer, a woman with iron-grey hair, shook her head. "That's not how the law works, Ma'am. This is her home. You don't have automatic rights to enter." Vivian tried to interject, clutching the papers like evidence of innocence. "She's exaggerating. We were just visiting. She probably trashed the place herself to make us look bad." The officer raised an eyebrow. "And those documents in your hand, did she plant those on you too?" My father sputtered, words failing under the weight of authority. Outside, movement caught my eye. Neighbours had gathered on their porches, drawn by the flashing lights. And then I saw it. Mr. Jenkins from across the street, holding up his phone, recording everything through my front window. My humiliation, my broken living room, my parents being questioned, it was all captured. The officers separated us, one leading my parents and Vivian toward the porch, the other guiding me aside for my statement. I explained everything, the years of estrangement, the sudden demands, the harassment, and now the break-in. My voice shook but did not falter. "They were specifically looking for your property documents?" the officer confirmed. "Yes, they've pressured me to sell my house to cover my sister's debt. When I refused, they escalated." The officer nodded grimly, jotting notes. "We'll file a full report. You have the option to press charges." "Yes," I said without hesitation. "I want to press charges." Meanwhile, the crowd outside had grown. Phones glowed in the dark like a constellation, recording every angle. This was no longer a private implosion, it was a public spectacle. Twist 8 unfolded before my eyes. By morning, clips of my parents being led into squad cars would circulate through the neighbourhood Facebook groups, maybe even spread further. The narrative they had spent months crafting, that I was the cold, selfish daughter, was unravelling. The world could now see who was truly crossing lines. Still, as the officers escorted them out, a wave of nausea rolled through me. The sight of my mother's tear-streaked face, my father's glare, Vivian's twisted defiance, it was an image I would never erase. My house felt violated, my safety threadbare. When the last patrol car pulled away, silence fell heavy over the wreckage. My legs gave out, and I sank onto the one chair left upright. I stared at the lipstick word screaming from the wall, at the feathers drifting from gutted cushions, at the shattered frame of what was supposed to be my refuge. A gentle knock came from the doorway. It was Beatrice, my elderly neighbour, her eyes filled with concern. "You shouldn't stay here tonight, dear," she said firmly. "Come with me. We'll deal with this mess tomorrow." I wanted to protest, to cling to my home, but the thought of sleeping inside walls that had been torn apart by my own blood made my chest seize. I nodded, too exhausted to argue. Gathering only a small overnight bag, I followed her across the street. Each step away from my house felt like defeat. My sanctuary had been stripped of its safety, reduced to rubble by the people who had once tucked me into bed as a child. That night, lying on a borrowed couch in Beatrice's quiet home, I felt the weight of rock bottom. I had lost my family years ago. Now I had lost my home's peace too. The one fortress I thought untouchable had been breached, and for the first time I wondered if I would ever feel safe again. The morning after the break-in, I stepped back into my house with shaking hands. The police had cleared the scene, but the wreckage remained. Books lay in heaps across the floor, splinters from a broken picture frame glittered underfoot, and the word selfish still screamed from the wall. It felt like walking into a corpse of what had once been alive with comfort. I started cleaning, more out of desperation than practicality. Each shredded pillow and overturned drawer was a wound, but I forced myself to restore order. While stacking files back into my office cabinet, I noticed an envelope that had slipped behind the desk during the chaos. Dust clung to the flap. Inside was a document I had nearly forgotten, the certificate confirming that my home was listed on the city's historical registry. I remembered the realtor's passing mention when I bought the house, but until now it had felt like trivia. Reading the fine print again, I realised its significance. As a designated property, my house couldn't be sold or significantly altered without the oversight of the Historical Society. Strict guidelines preserved its architectural integrity. A jolt ran through me. This explained why my family had been so frantic about finding the paperwork. Without these documents, they couldn't grasp how entangled the house's value really was. To any outsider, it might look like an asset easily liquidated. In truth, it came with layers of legal protection that made their scheme nearly impossible. Still holding the certificate, I called Janelle Park, a real estate attorney recommended by a colleague. When I met her in her office later that week, she scanned the document with sharp eyes. "This changes everything," she said. "Your family's actions already cross multiple legal lines: breaking and entering, destruction of property, attempted theft of documents. But if they were planning to use or forge these papers to sell or refinance the home, that edges into real estate fraud. Very serious." The word fraud echoed in my head. I had always known what they were doing was wrong, but hearing it named so plainly solidified it. "Do I have a case?" I asked. "You have more than a case," she replied. "You have leverage. We'll file for a restraining order immediately and we'll ensure everything is documented, the messages, the break-in, the damage." Her certainty steadied me. But then she frowned, tapping another folder I had brought. "These bank statements, are they your parents?" "Yes," I said cautiously. "They left them on the dining table that night. I picked them up without thinking." Janelle skimmed the pages, her expression hardening. "Mara, did you know your parents took out a reverse mortgage on their home?" I blinked. "What? No?" "It looks like they pulled nearly everything available. And based on these transactions, most of it funneled into Vivian's accounts over the last few years. Travel, boutique expenses, even apartment renovations. They've essentially drained their equity. If they default, they could lose the house." The room tilted slightly as I processed. My parents hadn't just been sacrificing for Vivian, they had been mortgaging their own future, dismantling their safety net brick by brick, all to bankroll her illusions. And now that well had run dry, they had turned to me. Twist 9 landed with a hollow thud. They had no fallback left. Their home, once the anchor of our family, was already compromised. That was why their eyes had been on mine. My house wasn't just a symbol of stability. It was their last chance. I pressed my palms against my knees, forcing air into my lungs. "So they've lost everything." "Not yet," Janelle said carefully. "But they're on the brink. That doesn't excuse what they did to you. It explains their desperation, but it doesn't justify it." Her words were clinical but kind, and I clung to them like a lifeline, because beneath my fury, grief twisted in me too. My parents had gambled away their security for Vivian, and now they wanted me to do the same. The cycle was consuming everything it touched. I left Janelle's office, clutching a folder of paperwork thicker than the one my family had tried to steal. Outside, the city buzzed with indifference. People hurried to lunch. Taxis honked. Children tugged on parents' hands, all unaware that my life had become a battlefield of blood and betrayal. That night, back in my damaged house, I sat on the floor with the historical registry certificate spread out before me. For the first time, I saw my home not just as a sanctuary, but as armour. Its walls were scarred now, but the law itself stood with me, holding a shield between my life and those who wanted to strip it bare. And I vowed I would wield that shield, no matter how many battles it took. The courtroom was cold, its fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead as I sat at the plaintiff's table beside Janelle Park. Across from us, my parents and Vivian huddled together, a fragile trio behind their attorney. Seeing them there, heads bowed, eyes darting, filled me with a strange mixture of dread and vindication. The judge called the hearing to order. Evidence was presented. Photos of my ransacked home, the lipstick scrawl, the police report, the stack of threatening messages I had carefully documented. Then came the financial records, Vivian's boutique statements, credit card bills, loan agreements, and receipts for luxury items that had nothing to do with business. Vivian was called to the stand. For the first time in years, she looked small. Without the armour of designer dresses and performative confidence, she seemed like a child, caught sneaking out past curfew. At first, she clung to the story. $260,000 in debt. A catastrophic failure of the economy, unsympathetic landlords, greedy vendors, but under questioning, the cracks spread. Of the $260,000, Janelle pressed, how much was actual business debt? Vivian hesitated, her voice faltering. About 130. And the rest? Her cheeks flushed. Expenses, presentation. Clients expect a certain standard, renovations, branding, events. Events like celebrity parties? Janelle asked sharply. First-class flies? Jewellery purchases? Vivian's silence said more than words. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. The image of Vivian as a struggling artist collapsed, replaced by a portrait of indulgence disguised as necessity. My parents shifted uncomfortably, their sacrifice now exposed as fuel for a vanity fire. The judge's face was stern. So, nearly half of the so-called debt was not essential. It was lifestyle. Vivian nodded, tears streaking her carefully painted face. I didn't mean for it to get this bad. I thought if I looked successful, it would become true. For the first time, I almost pitied her. Almost. But pity couldn't erase the scars carved into my home, or the years of blame hung around my neck like chains. Next came the matter of restitution. Janelle argued that my family should be responsible for the damage caused by the break-in. Their attorney tried to deflect, painting it as a misunderstanding, a family dispute taken too far. But the evidence was overwhelming. That's when Twist 10 surfaced. My parents' homeowners' insurance, already strained by their reverse mortgage, still covered liability for damages they caused to others' property. The judge ordered their insurer to compensate me for the destruction. The broken furniture, the vandalised walls, the stolen sense of safety. When the ruling was read, a strange calm settled over me. It wasn't joy exactly, it was something steadier, heavier validation. For once, the scales tipped my way. Afterward, Janelle and I walked out into the brisk afternoon. This is a step, she told me, not the end, but a turning point. You've drawn a line and the court backed it. The settlement money arrived within weeks. I used part of it to repair what had been destroyed. The cushions replaced, the walls scrubbed clean and repainted, the broken frames swapped for sturdier ones. But more importantly, I invested in security. Motion sensors, reinforced locks, a full surveillance system. My house, once breached, would not be left defenceless again. The first night, I activated the system. A small beep echoed through the halls, followed by silence. For the first time since the break-in, I slept without waking to phantom noises or imaginary footsteps. Justice hadn't healed everything, but it had built a wall I could lean against. Standing in my living room, freshly restored, I touched the cool glass of the new window and whispered aloud, "This house is still mine." For years, my family had dictated the terms of my worth. In that courtroom, for the first time, the terms were mine. By autumn, the scars of the break-in had been patched over. Fresh paint erased the word once scrawled in lipstick. New furniture filled the spaces gutted by rage, and my security system blinked steadily from each corner like sentinels. Yet what soothed me most wasn't the repairs, but the people who helped restore my life. When I hosted my first Friendsgiving in that repaired dining room, every chair was filled. Colleagues carried casseroles, neighbours brought pies, and laughter bounced off walls that had once echoed with silence. I carved the turkey with steady hands, realising that though my blood family had abandoned me, a chosen family had grown in their place. The shift was subtle but profound. I was no longer defined by who left me. I was uplifted by who stayed. Beatrice, my neighbour across the street, arrived with her famous pumpkin bread. She had been my anchor since the night she pulled me from the rubble of my broken home, insisting I sleep under her roof. That evening, as the party wound down, she lingered behind, her weathered hands resting on the edge of my kitchen table. "You know, Mara," she said softly, "I've seen this story before. Different names, same script." I looked at her, startled. "What do you mean?" Her eyes, sharp despite age, held mine. "My son. Years ago, he drained every bit of savings I had, promising business ventures and bright futures. Each time I gave in, each time I lost more, until one day I realized he wasn't asking for help, he was feeding on me." The words struck deep. Beatrice, always steady, always kind, had lived through the same cycle of exploitation, though hers wore a different face. "What did you do?" I asked quietly. She smiled sadly. "I stopped giving." He called me cruel, unloving, even wicked, but in the end he walked away. It hurt like hell, but I got my life back. Twist 11 settled over me. This wasn't just my story. It was a pattern repeating across generations, hidden behind the language of family loyalty. The shame I carried, that I was uniquely selfish, uniquely abandoned, lifted slightly. I wasn't alone in this exile. As the days grew shorter, I found myself leaning into the community around me. Jackson from work fixed a crooked cabinet hinge without being asked. Tara, my closest friend, filled my freezer with homemade soups. Beatrice stopped by every Wednesday with bread or stories, her presence a balm. Each act of kindness stitched another seam in the fabric of my life. For the first time, I felt what family should have been, not obligation or manipulation, but reciprocity. Support given freely, not extorted. On Christmas Eve, I hosted again. The table gleamed with mismatched dishes and candles, my house alive with chatter. At one point, I stepped onto the porch, snow falling softly around me, and listened to the hum of voices inside. My chest tightened with gratitude. I thought of the years I had spent begging for scraps of affection from parents who had already decided where their love belonged. And I realized something that stopped me cold. I didn't want back in, not anymore. This chosen family filled the void more completely than the original ever had. I wasn't an afterthought here. I wasn't the scapegoat. I was simply Mara, valued, respected, loved. When I returned inside, Beatrice squeezed my hand. Her grip was warm, steady. "See, you built something stronger than what you lost." Her words sank into me like roots. My home wasn't just patched walls and locked doors. It was a sanctuary rebuilt with the hands of people who wanted to be here. And for the first time in my life, I believed that being chosen was worth far more than being born into a family that had never truly claimed me. The new year brought a surprising envelope. It arrived at Janelle Park's office, forwarded to me under the court's restrictions. Inside was a handwritten letter, folded neatly, addressed in familiar script. Mara. Janelle read it first, scanning for hidden manipulation. Then she handed it to me, with a nod. "No demands, just read." I unfolded the pages cautiously. Vivian's handwriting wavered, not the confident flourish I remembered, but shaky, uneven. "Mara, I don't expect you to forgive me. What we did, was wrong. Breaking into your home, tearing apart your life, that was unforgivable. I see now how blind I've been, how much I took, and how little I gave. I thought if I looked successful, the world would believe it. But all I did was bury myself in debt and drag everyone down with me. You were right to set boundaries. You were right to walk away. I don't deserve your help, but I wanted to tell you I'm trying to change. I got a job, a real one. It's not glamorous. It's hard and it's humbling, but it's mine. For the first time, I'm earning something instead of taking it. I don't know if it will make up for anything, but I wanted you to know. Vivian. I sat back, stunned. My sister, who once floated from gallery openings to designer boutiques, who had sneered at the idea of ordinary work, was now admitting she had a job, a real one. Twist 12 emerged as I turned the page over. There, smudged in the corner, was a faint brown stain, grease maybe. The kind you pick up working in a cafe or handling stock boxes. A tiny mark, but undeniable proof. Vivian wasn't just saying the words, her hands had touched labour. For a moment, I didn't know how to feel. The anger that had burned for so long didn't vanish. The memories of betrayal, manipulation, invasion, those didn't dissolve under a single apology. And yet, reading her words, I felt something shift. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but release. I folded the letter carefully, placing it back in the envelope. Janelle raised an eyebrow. "Will you respond?" "Not yet," I said. "I need time. I need to see change, not just read it." That night, I sat on my porch with the letter in my lap, watching the streetlights flicker on. My security cameras blinked steadily, Beatrice's light glowed across the road, and laughter from passing kids echoed through the crisp air. I thought about Vivian standing behind a counter, wiping sweat from her forehead, maybe cursing a rude customer. I pictured her realizing that survival doesn't come from appearances, but from effort. Part of me felt lighter knowing she was finally learning what I had carried alone since I was 16. Another part held firm to the walls I had built. She might be changing, but I wasn't obligated to reopen the gates. Instead, I tucked the letter into a drawer. Not on display, not thrown away, but waiting, like a seed that may sprout or may wither, depending on what comes next. For the first time since the nightmare began, my chest didn't ache with constant tension. The letter hadn't healed me, but it had loosened the knot. I breathed deeper, steadier. And as the night settled around my home, I realized something simple but profound. Sometimes closure doesn't come in grand gestures or reconciliations. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in a smudged letter carried by the same hands that once reached only to take. 1 year after the night my sanctuary was torn apart, I stood at a podium in a grand old hall downtown. The room belonged to the city's historical society, its walls lined with portraits of architects and builders whose work had shaped the skyline. Tonight, though, the focus wasn't just on structures of brick and wood. It was on what those structures meant. I adjusted the microphone, the hush of the audience settling around me. When I first bought my home, I thought I was just buying walls and a roof. A place to sleep, a space to call my own. What I didn't understand then was that preserving a house is not only about protecting its history, it's about protecting the lives and stories lived inside. I glanced at the front row, where Beatrice sat beaming like a proud parent. Tara waved discreetly from beside her. Jackson gave me a thumbs up. My chosen family had filled the seats that once would have been occupied by relatives who dismissed me. Their presence gave me the courage to continue. My home was nearly taken from me, not by strangers, but by the people I once trusted most. In fighting to protect it, I learned something unexpected, that boundaries are not walls that keep love out. They are foundations strong enough to hold love that is genuine. Applause rippled through the room. I let it wash over me, then went on to describe the restoration process, the legal protections, and the way communities could safeguard historic homes without losing the soul inside them. But beneath every example, my words carried a second message: preservation of self. When the event ended, I stepped outside into the late spring air. The city lights glittered, cars hummed, and, for once, I felt entirely steady. It was then I heard from Janelle, who had joined me for the evening. She caught me by the arm, her voice low. "I thought you should know. Your parents moved into a small apartment last month. The house is gone, but they're stable, for now." I nodded, absorbing the news. Part of me ached, remembering the childhood rooms now belonging to strangers. But part of me felt relief too. They were finally learning limits, even if the lesson had come too late. "And Vivian?" I asked, bracing for the answer. Janelle's smile was faint but genuine. "She's been attending financial counselling regularly, court-mandated, but still, her counsellor says she's showing up, doing the work." Twist 13 unfolded quietly, not with fireworks, but with a glimmer of possibility. The sister who once drowned herself in vanity projects was now sitting in folding chairs, listening to someone explain interest rates and budgeting. The girl who scoffed at work was beginning to learn responsibility. It didn't erase the past, but it painted the future with a shade of hope I hadn't expected. That night, back at my own home, I lit the porch lantern and sat with a cup of tea. The air smelled of lilacs from Beatrice's yard, mingling with the faint scent of fresh paint on my own siding. I looked at the house, the banisters polished, the glass windows glinting, and thought about how far we had come together. 1 year ago, I had been on the floor of this living room, surrounded by feathers and shattered frames, wondering if safety could ever return. Tonight, the same walls stood firm, holding laughter, community, and a future that belonged to me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the next blow. I felt like I was living. That evening, after the event at the Historical Society, I returned home with a quiet heart. The street was still, the night sky stretched wide above me, and the lantern on my porch cast a pool of golden light over the steps. I sank into the old wooden chair that creaked familiarly beneath me. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't keeping watch. I was simply sitting, breathing, existing. The glow of the porch light illuminated the oak banisters, the very ones I had polished with my own hands. Beyond them, the garden Beatrice had helped me tend, swayed gently in the breeze. Everything looked ordinary, but the peace it carried was extraordinary. My home had been attacked, broken, rebuilt, but it was still mine. More importantly, I was still mine. As I sipped my tea, I thought about what Dr. Knox had once told me. Boundaries aren't walls that keep love out. They are gates that keep love honest. The words rang true now, more than ever. My parents had called boundaries selfish. Vivian had called them jealousy, but the people sitting in my dining room at Friendsgiving, the neighbours who had brought bread and warmth when I needed it most, they understood. They respected those gates, and that respect was what made it real family. Family, I realised, wasn't about DNA or the obligations you can't escape. It was about choice, about mutual recognition, about love that didn't demand you burn yourself down to keep someone else warm. True family didn't trespass, didn't demand ultimatums, didn't scrawl accusations on your walls. True family stood beside you because they wanted to, not because they had something to gain. The thought settled in my chest like a final stone in a foundation. I wasn't the villain my family painted me to be. I wasn't the scapegoat anymore. I was simply Mara, whole, steady enough. I closed my eyes, listening to the chorus of crickets. The weight of years of abandonment pressed lighter than before, replaced by the warmth of the golden light around me. For once, I didn't feel the need to brace for impact. That was when my phone buzzed, a new email. I almost ignored it, unwilling to let the world intrude on this moment. But something nudged me to check. The subject line read, "Your story saved me." My heart thudded as I opened it. "Mara, you don't know me, but I found the article about your court case and what you said tonight at the Historical Society. I wanted to tell you, your story saved me. I've been struggling with the same thing. A family that only loves me when I give, that abandons me when I say no. I thought I was crazy for drawing boundaries, that I was the selfish one. But hearing what you went through, how you stood your ground, showed me I'm not alone. You gave me the courage to leave before I lost everything. Thank you. From one survivor to another, you've given me hope." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. Twist 14 landed not with shock, but with quiet awe. My pain, my survival, had rippled outward to someone else. My story wasn't just mine anymore, it was a bridge for others. I set the phone down, gazing out at the darkened street. Somewhere, another person was beginning their journey of breaking free, and somehow my voice had been a spark. The porch light hummed, steady and warm. My house, once the site of betrayal, now shone like a beacon, not just for me, but for anyone who needed proof that survival was possible. I leaned back, exhaling a breath that seemed to carry years of weight into the night air. For the first time, I felt not just safe, but purposeful. My boundaries hadn't just protected me, they had opened the way for others. And under the glow of that golden light, I knew I wasn't alone. I never had been. I just needed to stop looking in the wrong places for family and start recognizing the truth. Sometimes family is chosen, sometimes it's strangers who become allies. And sometimes it's the echo of your story in someone else's survival